All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling Ramit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And we've got some interesting sources here, a couple of book reviews, even a blog post from Mr. Money Mustache himself. So, yeah, get ready for some different perspectives.
It's interesting how these sources kind of show two different ways people think about building wealth.
Yeah.
Like you have Sethi's very practical, almost like a system for managing your money, right? And then, you have that more frugal, minimalist approach that Mr. Money Mustache is known for.
Yeah, it's like two different paths, maybe leading to, well, maybe not even the same destination. Some reviewers are loving Sethi's 6-week plan, saying it's easy to follow and really focuses on automating your finances. But then you have Mr. Money Mustache. He's questioning that whole spend on the things you love idea. He sees that as a potential problem if you're trying to achieve financial independence.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, isn't it? It makes you think about what being rich really means. Is it just about having a lot of money? Or is it more about having the freedom to live a life that reflects your values?
So, okay, let's talk about this 6-week plan. It seems like it covers everything from credit cards and bank accounts to investing and negotiating.
It's pretty comprehensive, yeah. And it's meant to be very actionable. SETI really emphasizes automation and making things psychologically easier. He wants to remove those mental barriers that often stop people from taking control of their money.
Yeah, and he has that whole negotiate like an Indian thing, right? I remember that from the book. It was pretty bold.
Yes. He definitely encourages readers to be more assertive, more strategic when they negotiate. And he draws on his own cultural background, his own experiences to show how to do that. He gives specific examples, even scripts for negotiating lower interest rates, waiving bank fees, even getting better deals on everyday purchases.
Speaking of automation, that's something I've personally found incredibly helpful. Once you set it up, it's like your finances are running on autopilot. They're working for you, even when you're not actively thinking about them.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the power of inertia, right? Instead of relying on willpower, which can be so unreliable, you build systems that automatically take care of your financial goals.
Okay, now let's address the elephant in the room, I guess you could say. Sethi's spend on what you love philosophy and why it's rubbed some people the wrong way, especially those in the mustachian camp.
Well, Mr. Money Mustache is all about frugality, right? Early retirement.
Yeah.
His whole approach is to cut expenses as much as possible and save like crazy so you can reach financial independence fast. So, yeah, Sethi's focus on spending, even if it's on things you enjoy, kind of goes against that core principle.
Right. Mr. Money Mustache argues that real happiness comes from experiences and relationships, not stuff. And that spending too much, even on things you like, can delay or even prevent you from reaching your financial goals.
That's a good point. It really makes us think about our relationship with spending. Are purchases actually bringing us lasting joy, or are they just a temporary dopamine hit?
So it's not about depriving yourself, right? It's more about being intentional with your spending, making sure it aligns with what you value and what you're trying to achieve in the long run.
Absolutely. And this is where the conversation gets really interesting. It's not just about spending less. It's about spending smarter. It's about figuring out what truly brings you joy and satisfaction, and then using your money to support that.
One of the book reviewers brought up something important too, the issue of income inequality. They felt like Sethi's advice might not be realistic for everyone.
Yeah, that's a critical point. Someone making a six-figure salary obviously has a lot more flexibility than someone struggling to make ends meet. Things like housing costs, medical bills, even just reliable transportation can create huge financial burdens. It can make it really hard to put some of Sethi's strategies into practice.
Yeah, and for someone who's barely getting by, the idea of spending extravagantly on what you love might sound pretty out of touch.
For sure. It really highlights the need to consider those systemic factors that shape our financial realities. Personal finance advice, even if it's well-intentioned, has to be seen in that broader socioeconomic context.
So how do we reconcile these different viewpoints? You have, say, these practical tips for managing money, but then there are concerns about consumerism and income inequality. It's like we're trying to navigate this financial maze with multiple paths and potential traps along the way.
And that's why this deep dive is so helpful. It lets us examine those different paths, weigh the pros and cons, and ultimately choose the route that makes sense for our own values and circumstances.
All right, so we've talked about Sethi's 6-week plan, the spend on what you love debate, and even touched on the complexities of income inequality. So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's time to dig into some of the specific tactics and strategies Sethi outlines in his book. He's got some really interesting advice on negotiating, automating your finances, and building the right mindset for financial success.
Sounds like we're about to get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's do it. Okay, so we talked about the big picture stuff, but now how about we get into some specific tips that Sethi actually recommends, like, that negotiate like an Indian thing. It seemed pretty bold, but also kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is bold. It's really about giving yourself more power as a consumer.
Mm.
Sethi actually gives you like scripts and strategies for negotiating. Things like lower interest rates on credit cards, waiving fees at banks, and even getting better deals on cable and internet.
I gotta say, I'm not really a great negotiator. It always feels a bit confrontational to me.
I get that. But the interesting thing is that Sethi frames it as a win-win, right? You're not trying to pull one over on anyone. You're just standing up for yourself. You're aiming for an outcome that's actually better for both sides.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. So it's about being assertive but fair.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. Sethi really emphasizes being prepared, knowing what you're worth, and not being afraid to ask for what you want.
All right, I'm feeling a little more empowered already. So what about automation? That seems to be a big part of Sethi's approach.
Oh yeah, it's one of the most powerful things you can do to build wealth. The idea is to create systems that basically run on their own, you know, so you're not relying on willpower or having to constantly watch your spending.
Like setting up those automatic transfers to your savings account or contributing to your 401k through your work.
Exactly. And Sethi takes it even further. He talks about automating bill payments, tracking all your expenses, even getting lower rates on those subscriptions you have.
It's like having a personal finance assistant in the background, making sure your money is organized and going where it needs to go.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It almost takes the human element out of it, which,
Yeah.
let's be honest, that's often the hardest part about managing money. We get emotional about money, we make impulsive decisions sometimes, or, we just forget to pay our bills on time.
Absolutely. And Sethi knows this. That's why he talks about the psychology of money. He says it's so important to understand those biases and habits we have when it comes to our finances.
So it's not just about setting up the right systems, it's also about having the right mindset.
Exactly. He wants us to develop what he calls a rich life mindset. It's about abundance, gratitude, being generous. It's believing you can create wealth and using your resources to make a positive impact.
One of the reviewers actually compared it to this idea of frugality as a muscle. You have to develop it over time.
I love that analogy. It's so true. Just like any muscle, managing your money effectively takes practice, discipline, and a willingness to challenge those old habits.
And the more we flex that frugality muscle, the stronger and more financially resilient we become.
Exactly. And I think that's a really empowering message. No matter how much you earn or what your current financial situation is, you can always make positive changes and build a more secure future.
Right. But let's go back to that point about income inequality for a second. It's easy to get excited about optimizing credit cards and automating savings. But we can't ignore the fact that not everyone starts at the same place financially.
Absolutely. Someone working a minimum wage job is going to have a totally different financial reality than someone making six figures. Things like housing costs, healthcare, even having reliable transportation can be huge burdens. It can make it almost impossible to follow some of these strategies.
Yeah, and I think for someone struggling to make ends meet, Sethi's advice might not feel very relevant, even if it's good advice in general.
That's right. We have to acknowledge those systemic factors and tailor these principles to our own situations.
So if someone's struggling, the focus might be more on finding ways to increase their income or reduce expenses or find resources that are specifically designed to help people in their situation.
Exactly. There are a lot of organizations and programs out there to help people through tough financial times. It's about finding a path that feels sustainable and empowering no matter where you're starting from.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, it's easy to get so caught up in the day-to-day of managing money that we forget to think about those big picture questions, like what really matters in the long run.
It's like we're focused on building this amazing financial engine, but we haven't even decided where we want to go. And what's the point of having a perfect engine if you're not going anywhere exciting?
I love that. It really puts things in perspective. So how can our listeners actually start to figure out what their own rich life looks like? Like, what are some questions they could ask themselves?
Well, I think a good place to start is just thinking about what brings you joy, what brings you satisfaction, what are your passions, what makes you feel truly alive, what kind of mark do you want to leave on the world?
And it doesn't have to be these huge, ambitious goals. It could be as simple as just spending more quality time with your family or pursuing some creative hobby or volunteering in your community.
Exactly. It's about finding those things that really light you up no matter how much money they involve. And then you can start thinking about how your finances can help you do more of those things.
Right, so if spending time with your family is super important to you, maybe you start budgeting for regular vacations together. Or maybe you set aside some money to help your kids pay for college.
Or let's say you're really passionate about the environment, you could look into investing in companies that are focused on renewable energy. Or you could donate some of your income to organizations that are working to protect the planet.
It's about aligning your spending with what you truly value, using your money as a tool to build a life that feels authentic and meaningful.
And it's important to remember, this is a journey, not a destination. Your values might change over time, your circumstances might change, and that's okay. The key is to be flexible, to check in with yourself and see if your goals still feel right, and then adjust your plan as you go.
So it's not about creating some super strict plan and never deviating from it. It's more like having a roadmap that can help you reach your destination, but with the understanding that you might take some detours along the way.
Exactly. Life is unpredictable. Your financial plan should be able to handle those unexpected turns.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into I Will Teach You to Be Rich. We've gone beyond just the practical stuff and really explored what it means to be wealthy in a holistic sense, to build a truly rich life.
We unpacked Sethi's 6-week plan, we talked about that spend on what you love idea, and we even got into the complexities of income inequality.
But most importantly, we landed on this question. What does a rich life mean to you? And I think that's the perfect place to leave our listeners. It's a question that makes you really think about what matters most to you. So as we wrap up, I encourage you to keep that question in mind. Let it guide your choices, let it inspire you to take action, and let it empower you to create a life that is both financially secure and deeply fulfilling.
That's beautiful. And one last thing I want to add is this. Building a rich life is not a solo mission. It's about connecting with other people, sharing your abundance, and making the world a better place. When you approach life with that spirit of generosity and purpose, you'll discover that true wealth isn't just about what you have, but what you give back